Hey, this is Ike. I'm making a 3-6 full ring video today. I'm going to be trying something a little bit new. For my first two videos, I recorded the audio as I was playing. For this one, I'm going to be recording some voiceover narration on about half an hour of play from earlier this week. I want you guys to tell me what you think of this. I can do either one for my future videos. This has the advantage that I know what's coming up. I can sort of tailor my discussion to some themes that are going to arise as the session goes on. And the other good thing about this is that I can pause the video playback and keep talking if multiple hands come up at the same time. So please post in the forums and tell me what you prefer, and I can do whatever in the future. So look forward to hearing from you guys about that. Like I was saying, I already know what's coming up, so some things that I'm going to be talking about today are using stats to make reads, especially when you only have a few hands with somebody. You know, making a read based on somebody's stats after 15, 30, something like that, hands. And another thing I'm going to be talking about today is playing against underbets. Underbets can be real tricky to play against because it's often hard to figure out what people are thinking. I know it's hard for me because I almost never underbet. I mean, I underbet a good bit in re-raised pots where, you know, you can go half pot, half pot, half pot, all in. But I very rarely, you know, lead out for the minimum into a 6 big blind pot after calling a raise from the big blind or something like that. So it's often very hard for me to guess what people are doing when they make plays like that. So that's going to be something I'm talking about a bit this session. And now I've got a hand here. I'm going to talk about this 10-9 suited. Obvious call pre-flop. I call that with any two suited connectors, and that's a great flop for me. I could lead out here, but I'm a bit worried I'll just get called by a king, and then playing later streets won't be so good if I don't improve. Whereas if I check, I can just check, and somebody's likely to bet it on this board. It's sort of an action flop. So if somebody bets it, then I can just raise big, maybe all in, maybe less than all in. I'm going to end up shoving over this underbet raise and a cold call here. I think this shove shows a profit by a good bit. I'm bluffing into a pot of almost 300 here, and I'm going to be about 35% equity even against a set, even against an ace-high flush draw. I'm only in really miserable shape if somebody has king X of clubs here. So I lose about 150 in equity when I'm called by a very big hand. My hand is about even money against something like ace-king. And as it turned out, I got called by the sevens. I'm about 35% equity there. So I lose about 150 bucks in equity in that spot. I gain 300 bucks when I take the pot down, so I have to be getting called just about every time to make that shove wrong. So I guess one thing I want to hear from you guys about is, do you think I should make it 6 tables while I'm playing full ring? It can kind of slow down sometimes, but on the other hand, maybe it would be hard to follow 6 tables. I don't know. Please post in the forums and let me know what you think about 4 versus 6 tables for my full ring videos. Thanks. And one other request I can like to make is, if you're going to be posting questions about hands from these videos, if you could include in your post about when in the video the hand happened, you know, something like 3 minutes into chapter 2 or something like that, that would really help me to go back and look up the hand so that I can look it over again and answer your question more easily. Thank you. So yeah, I think maybe 6 tables is the way to go, especially since if I'm doing the voiceover narration rather than talking as I play, I can pause if multiple hands come up at once, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to end up doing later in this video. Another thing I want to talk about in this video is tightening up a little bit against tougher players. I think in my 1-2 video I definitely would have raised that 10-8 off there from the cutoff, but well, actually, the bigger consideration for why I didn't raise it there is that I have the 2 short stacks behind me, but in any case, I probably wouldn't have raised that into 3 competent full stacks behind me at this level. I think that I'm going to get 3-bet a bit more, and my opponents are going to play better if I do get called, so I think that fewer hands show a profit for a raise there. But I'm still going to be opening pretty loose, maybe looser than a lot of you guys are used to seeing. I don't know. I think that queen 10 off from the cutoff, for instance, is going to show a profit here, but that is about the weakest hand I'm going to be opening from that spot in terms of unsuited high card hands. And of course that c-bet on the flop when I flop the straight draw is totally standard. I'm going to make that almost every time. I guess I'll check it behind somewhere around 10 to 20% of the time, just because I like to. I'm going to check behind on that board a lot with my misses, and my opponents are going to bet the turn a lot to take it away from me, and I want to check behind both some top pair hands and some good draws so that my range will be a little stronger on the turn. Make it a little less of a free pot for them when I do check behind on a coordinated flop like that. So it's going to be another little bit until I get dealt a playable hand here, so just to get back to that 10-9 suited hand, I'm going to be shoving that flop with any combo straight flush draw, any ace-high flush draw, and set of 6s, set of 7s, or 7-6 for 2 pair. I think I probably have to fold other draws, 8-9 for an open-ended straight draw, or queen high flush draw. I might be tempted to cold call. Any worse flush draw, I'm pretty certain I have to fold. Even the queen high flush draw is probably a fold there. It's pretty easy to be badly dominated. And I would also fold any king there. I would have re-raised ace king, but if I somehow had it, I would fold it. And I would certainly fold king queen. So, as you can see, against that range, my opponents are in a tough spot with any one pair hand. Actually, it's not really even a tough spot. They really have to fold ace king by a good bit there, though they'll probably often call. So I stand to be taking down the pot a lot, since nobody's guaranteed to have a nut flush draw or set against me in that spot. Anyway, I've got a hand coming up in just a minute here where I'm going to be talking about making reads based on stats from not very many hands. I'm going to be playing a pot against this guy Yahweh here. My rabbi would not be very happy with me for saying Yahweh, but that's his name, so what am I going to do? Anyway, I'm playing a pot against this Yahweh guy here in a minute. My stats are reading 38.5, 30.8 over 13 hands for him so far, which is unbelievably loose for a full ring game. Those would be stats you would expect to see on a giant fish. But when I look around here, he's playing 3 of the 4 tables I'm at, and probably some other ones, and he has at least a full stack at every table, a double stack on one table, a quadruple stack on another. So it stands to reason he's a regular, and probably a winning regular. The vast majority of people who play a lot of tables are at least marginal winners. So, since it's essentially impossible to win with stats like that, I have to assume that that he's probably pretty loose, but that those stats overrepresent how loose he is. Against a player who's genuinely that loose, I'd have to consider calling or 4-betting with those pocket 4s there. But I'm going to assume that Yahweh is probably on the loose side, but not actually anywhere near as loose as my stats are telling me. If I was only playing one table with him, I wouldn't necessarily make the same assumption. I would still assume he was tighter than the stats indicated, but less drastically so than I do in this case. And now I'm going to pause the video real quick, because I got 2 hands going on here. First of all, in the upper left corner here, I checked the big blind after this guy the short stack limped 2 off the button, and I got a great flop, top pair with a good kicker here. I'm certainly going to stack it off one way or another. Folding at any point is not under consideration. unless somehow the flop got checked through and the turn came off real bad, like a jack or something, jack or an 8. But in any case, I decide that check raising is much better than leading out here, because I think he's very unlikely to check it back, and in particular, very, very unlikely to check it back with any of the hands that are drawing it all live to beat me. He's certainly going to bet this with king jack, king queen, queen jack, and also with worse tens, probably a lot of nines. I think he's betting this flop with all of the hands that are in reasonably good shape, and really only checking behind with hands like small pairs, and that's even a win for me as well, because it's good for me for the flop to get checked through relative to my leading out and just forcing him to fold right away, because I might be able to check it and do some bluff on a later street, or maybe bet the river and get a call from a very weak hand if the flop and turn get checked through. So I think checking is much better than leading out, and now when I check, I think that raising all in over that bet is better than a smaller raise, and also better than calling. It's better than calling because he's so likely to be drawing live against me and to play later streets well with hands like, well, against my hand, that is, with hands like queen jack, king jack, etc. So I could raise smaller, but again, I think that's more likely to have him playing closer to correct than more incorrect against my hand with a lot of worse hands, because he probably stacks off with just about exactly the same range against the smaller raise as against the shove, but maybe he'll occasionally make an accidental good play, like calling the flop with some hand that's drawing somewhat live against me and then folding to a turn shove, or something like that. So when the choice is between giving your opponent more or less choices, it's generally better to give him less choices, and I go ahead and shove it here. I'm going to resume the video now and start talking about the ace-7 hand. I raised that hand pre-flop, and then after getting called by both blinds, I bet the flop, got called by both players again, and now I'm in a somewhat questionable spot on the turn. That's not a very good card, but I think that if either of them had hit the flush, they'd be likely to lead out on that card rather than check it to me, because it's so unlikely I'm going to fire a second barrel there without a very strong hand that would also stack off to the bet, because it's such a good card for them. And then when I get called on the turn, I think the most likely hands for them are things like ace-6 or some other 6, 6-5, 6-4, ace-5, ace-4, pocket 4s, pocket 5s, pretty much everything except ace-6 got there. Also bigger pairs that are ahead of me anyhow. They like check called flop with 8s or 9s, which is fairly believable, though I'd expect them to raise it a lot more often than they check call. In any case, I think I was probably good on the turn, and that river probably beat me, given that I got called on my turn bet. Now, on the upper right corner there, just a second ago, I was considering re-raising with the king 4 suited there. If Yahweh was actually as loose as stats indicate, I would re-raise, but like I was saying earlier, I don't really buy that he is that loose. And now I'm going to raise this 10-8 suited on the button to 15 to 2.5 big blinds. There are 2 short stacks in the blinds, and I think that raising to more than 2.5x there is kind of just giving away money. I think that they're not going to play much different against 3x and 2.5x, but that you just lose an extra half a big blind when they shove on you. So I go back and forth whether I prefer a min raise or 2.5x or something in between there. I think it's pretty close and probably doesn't matter that much. The cost of min raising is that you get called significantly more often, but depending on how well the short stacks play post flop, that may not even be a loss. I go back and forth on that one a lot. I think either is fine. In that case, I made it 2.5x. Now I have this ace-queen against the min raise from the third stacked probably weak player here. Min-raising into a poster is a pretty strange play. Further evidence besides his small stack that he's probably not awesome. I'm going to pause real quick again because I've got two hands going on here. I probably could have made it a bit bigger than the 36 I did there. Maybe 44 would have been better. Maybe 48. Anywhere from 36 to 48 probably would have been fine there. Bigger would not have been good, because I do want him to call here. He's probably not a very strong player. Ace-Queen's a huge hand. I want to see a flop and let him make mistakes post-flop, especially with any of the hands that would be marginal calls for him, where he might call for a smaller bet, but not for a bigger one. I certainly want to see a flop against those hands. He's going to continue with medium plus pairs and ace-king for sure, no matter what, I think. So it's small pairs and a lot of hands I dominate are the sorts of hands that he would be marginal between calling and folding, and a smaller raise might encourage him to call. So anyway, he calls the 36. We see this flop, and he open shoves this board for about double pot. And I really just don't think I can call here. He'll have a king some of the time. I think a king is his single most likely hand. Ace-king, king-queen, king-jack, any of those. He might have just shoved the ace-king pre-flop, but he might have just called, and I think he calls the other ones a good bit. And, in fact, my smallish re-raise pre-flop was designed to get him to call those hands. So, when he open shoves here, I think he's a king a lot, a 9 some of the time, a smaller pocket pair some of the time, and the only hands I beat are probably gut shots, queen jack, queen 10, jack 10. I think that's a believable hand for him as well, but all things considered, I'm pretty sure it's a fold. I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see a few of the hands I beat there, the gut shots I mentioned before, and maybe even a worse ace, though it's a pretty horrible way to play a worse ace. But on balance, I'm pretty sure it's a fold. Now, there's this other pot up here to consider with the queen-jack suited. I'm going to resume the video now. Another spot where I have to think about whether or not I buy the stats that I'm seeing in front of me. Over 24 hands, I have that guy at 11.5, 4. And against a player who's genuinely that tight, the queen-jack suited is a clear fold pre-flop. His open raise range is something like 8s or 9s plus, ace-king, ace-queen, and maybe ace-jack, ace-10 suited, stuff like that. I'm going to pause again before I get behind too much on this hand. So, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and assume that because players that tight are actually quite rare, it's not inconceivable that he's genuinely an 11-4 or something close to it, but it's more likely that he just got a run of 25 cards such that he played that loose than that he is genuinely, or played that tight than that he is genuinely that tight of a player. So I think it's probably more likely he's somewhere in the range of like 14 to 16 VPIP, 5 to 10 pre-flop raise is probably a lot more likely than as tight as his stats indicate. So the queen-jack suited is still pretty marginal against that ranges of hands that I think he could be opening there, but I go ahead and call it. I could be convinced it was a bad call, but it's close either way. But I'm going into the pot very cognizant of the fact that when I make top pair hands, there's a high chance I'm dominated and that I want to keep the pot small. And so I make top pair, he c-bets the flop, and I just call. Now I turn trips, and I'm actually going to check it behind when he checks to me, which is sort of an unusual play, but I think there are a lot of reasons that it's actually a good one. One is that the biggest one is that I think I'm going to have a hard time getting two streets of value out of pocket pairs, 10s through aces. And I think he'll almost certainly check call the turn with those hands if I bet, but especially if the river comes off anything bad, like an 8, a queen, or any club, he'll be very inclined to check fold the river, and he might even check fold the river if a fairly safe card comes off. The other reasons to check it back on the turn here are that, well, for one thing, I'm going to get check raised some of the time here, and it's usually going to be hands that beat me, like ace-jack or king-jack, or a set of 9s. But it's sometimes going to be bluffs, so I'm sometimes going to make a mistake against the check raise. I think that his range is strong enough when he check raises that I'd have to fold, but that I will sometimes be making a mistake by folding. So that's not a situation I'm excited about. And another reason to check it back is that if he has something like ace-king or ace-queen, that he's just getting ready to check fold and give up here. By checking it back, I might let him improve on the river, and then he'll maybe bet or maybe check call. Or if he has some total miss like king-queen or something like that, he might even bluff the river, queen-10. I mean, not total miss. Those hands are obviously drawing live against me, but I might get him to bluff the river with some hand I beat, where he would have check-folded the turn. So I think there are a lot of arguments for checking it back on the turn, and it's what I end up doing, and I like the play. So he checks, I check, after a bit of thought. Betting here is certainly far from a bad play. The 7 comes off, and he bets the river, and I have another decision here. I can call or I can raise, and I end up calling here. In retrospect, I think I like a raise, but I think it's a thin raise. I think that he's going to fold a lot of his one-pair hands, 10s through aces. 10s through aces, I think, are his most likely value bet hands there. He's certainly going to fold any bluff. But he's going to have ace-jack or king-jack or a boat of some sort some of the time, and he's always going to call those, whereas I think he's often going to fold 10s through aces. So it's a marginal decision whether or not I want to raise that river for value. Depends a lot on how willing I think he's going to be to call with his one-pair hands. And yeah, I don't know the player well enough to be confident either way there, but in retrospect, I think I probably should have put in a small raise. I think I probably, if I make it 2.5 to 3 times what he bet there, maybe even 3.5 times, I think I'm going to get called by 10s through aces a lot. They should all be the same hand to him, but I think he's considerably more likely to call aces or kings, because people just hate to fold those hands, than to call 10s. It shouldn't matter to him. It's not like I ever have queens there, but I think he'll be more likely to call the aces and kings. In any case, that's, I think, maybe the trickiest hand of this session that I played. I'd be particularly interested in hearing some people's opinions on that one on the forums. I'd like to get into a little discussion about that. Wonder how many people play it the same way. So I open ace-queen off in early position here. Obviously very standard. Ace-jack is pretty marginal there, but I'd probably be opening it too. And I get called by both blinds. And now here comes another weird underbet to play against. Yahweh is going to lead out for 12 into 52 here. And I don't know quite what to make of that, but I'm getting 5-1, and I have 6 outs against anything other than a king. I might already be good. I might take him off his hand on a later street if I'm not good. I think that for the price I'm getting laid, I can't really consider folding there. So he checks the turn, and I go ahead and follow up with a pretty big bet, and I take it down. It's real hard for me to put him on a hand there. I really don't know what he did that with. Something like pocket pair 3s through 7s is pretty believable. Something like gut shot on the flop, queen jack or queen 10. It couldn't really have been jack 10 because he would have turned the open ender, and I'm pretty confident he wouldn't have check folded that. But maybe he had a gut shot on the flop and wanted to see a cheap turn. That would make some sense. Though I don't think it would make it a good play. I think he'd do much better to lead out for closer to full pot and dramatically increase his chances of taking it down rather than making that goofy little bet. Maybe he had something like ace-jack or ace-10. I don't think he ever check folds the turn with a pair of 9s or better, but I could be wrong. Yeah, I really don't know what to put him on with that line, but I mean, I think it's unlikely he leads flop tiny and then checks the turn with a strong hand, so I like how I played it, and obviously it did work out. It would be pretty surprising for him to play a set or something like that, because, underbetting the flop and checking the turn on a super dry board is not exactly a good way to get a lot of money in with a big hand. So, very hard to decide what he had there, but I'm happy with how I played it. And not just because it worked out. I would play it the same situation came up again. And have played it like that in similar spots many times in the past. So it's going to end up being folded to me with this ace-3 suited in the small blind, and I'm going to open it to 3 times the big blind, intending to call if the short stack in the big blind shoves. That's how I always play any ace-x hand, small to big, against a short stack. I think that they shove a range against which the ace is an easy call, and that no other line is better. And I opened to 3 times the big blind against a short stack from the small blind to the big blind, but I opened to 4 times the big blind against a normal stack. I switch it somewhere between 30 and 40 big blinds, depending on the player. Generally around 30, unless I know the player. Against some weak players, I'll open to 3 or 3.5 times the big blind against a 30 to 50 big blind stack. And I raised to 30 after these 2 limps with the ace-10 off on the button there. That's very standard play for me, and I'm going to c-bet this flop when checked too. Also very, very standard. Limping it pre-flop wouldn't be terrible, but I think that raising is significantly better, and betting the flop is pretty much mandatory there. I think that I take it down a huge percentage of the time, and especially with the backdoor club draw, but even if I didn't have it, my hand is a pretty solid semi-bluff hand. Against the range he's calling with, I'm likely to improve to the best hand later. And I opened this ace-10 suited in the cutoff, obviously an easy open. I'm opening any ace-x suited there. Get called by this passive, half-stacked, sort of fishy player from the small blind. I don't have a whole lot of hands with him, but when somebody's played a few hands but has never raised pre-flop and has about a half stack, I'm pretty comfortable making the read that they're a pretty weak player regardless. And now he underbet the turn there, and it's real hard for me to put him on anything that I beat when he check calls that flop and then underbets turn. I think it's a flush a whole lot of the time. Could be something like a medium pocket pair with a club, or some ace high that he check called the flop with, and he has the ace of clubs, so he turned the nut flush draw and decided to underbet it. But especially taking into account the fact that his bet sizing left him with just about exactly a pot size bet left on the river, I think it's very likely he had a real strong hand, and neither calling nor raising seems like a profitable play to me there. It seems very unlikely to me that he decided to take that line as a bluff, that he just check-called the flop with, like, king 10 high or something bizarre like that, and then let out for a third pot on a scary turn card. Don't see that being his play at all. And same spot has come up again here that I was talking about with the ace-x, small to big against a short stack, open to 3x, intending to call the push. Now I have 9-10 suited in early position here, and there's a poster in the cutoff. I'm going to open it to 4 times the big blind here. I like opening a bit bigger when there's a post, because there's more in the pot. Other people are more incentivized to call, and you should make your raise proportionally bigger to counteract that incentive, because you do want to take down the bigger pot pre-flop. Now I call these 3s against the min raise here. I'm going to pause real quick because I got 2 hands going on at the same time. Now I'll unpause it for a second. I'm going to check raise the 9-10 suited here, and I'm going to bet the 3s when check 2 here. Check raising the 9-10 suited is a very, very aggressive play, but I think it's correct against Kelicitin because he's so loose pre-flop, and this plan relies on the belief that he will continue against that check raise with a very wide range, that he'll either call or re-raise with all sorts of draws, and maybe even a pair of 7s, maybe even just overcards. I'm relying on him playing very loose against that. I'm in no way bluffing or semi-bluffing. I'm raising with every intention of getting it in if he calls or re-raises. It's a very aggressive way to play the hand, but I think it's the best way to play it against somebody as loose as him. I could be convinced that it's going a bit overboard, but with ace-9 I would absolutely do it, and I don't think the kicker makes a big enough difference to change how I would play it. Now with these 3s, he check-called the flop, the third king gets there, and now he leads out on the turn for 2/3 pot. I'm going to pause again here in just a second. I could call here. It's a bit tricky deciding what he has. I think it's probably not quads. I don't really see him check calling the flop with trips, though it's conceivable. But even if he had, I really don't see him first check calling with trips and then leading out when he hits quads. It seems like if he's check called and improved to quads, he would certainly prefer to check it again and let me keep either value betting a worse hand or bluffing with some hopeless hand that can't improve to beat him. He certainly doesn't want to lead out and force me to fold some hand that's drawing dead here. So unless he's making a very tricky play and trying to induce a bluff here by leading out or something like that, I think he probably doesn't have quads. So I'm thinking I could call. He could have a hand like ace-jack, ace-queen, queen-jack that he check-called the flop with, and now he's sort of making a strange play here that's certainly not a value bet, but a pretty poor bluff, because it's going to be hard to get me off of a very strong hand here. Or he could have something like a pair 4s through 9s. It's hard to put him on a hand here. He's playing his hand very strangely, but I think I can put him pretty confidently on not quads. So I'm going to make a sort of weird little underbet bluff here. I'm going to raise to 125, which is a weird play, weird bet sizing. I certainly don't have anything close to a balanced range here when I make this bet. I certainly wouldn't play quads this way. But I think it stands to do well against an unknown in exactly this spot. I think that he might fold 4s through 9s. I doubt he'd fold a 10, but I think he might fold 4s through 9s. I think he's likely to, and obviously that would be a huge win if he folds the best hand here. I think he's likely to fold ace-queen, ace-jack, queen-jack. Definitely queen-jack, and ace-queen, ace-jack, he might fold, he might call. If he calls that hand, that's also a win for me, because he's going to call and he's going to check the river, and I'm going to check it back and win. So that's great. The only way this goes real bad is if he has a 10 or quads, or if he 3-bet bluffs me, which I think is very unlikely. If he doesn't have quads, my line will certainly put a seed of doubt in his mind, make him think that there's a decent chance I do have quads, so I'm very comfortable folding to any further aggression, either call and lead or re-raise after I put in my small raise here. And I think that it's a good little bluff, block bet sort of weird play. I don't want to call and have to play the river against the range that I'm putting him on, because he's going to bet again for value with the 10 probably, and I think he's going to bet again with the queen jack and maybe the ace jack or ace queen a decent amount of the time to bluff. And I don't really know what he's going to do on the river with the 4s through 9s, so I don't really want to play against a river bet, and I also don't really want to be guessing whether or not I need to bluff against a river check. So all in all, I think that my best option is to make it 125 or so here, probably followed by folding rather than calling. I don't think calling is going to work out well here. But anyway, I go ahead and I make it 125, and I do end up taking it down here. So I'm happy with how it worked out. I think I'm happy with how I played the hand. I think this was a good play, but it's definitely a weird play. It's definitely not something I do very often, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that I don't find myself in a spot like this very often. But all that doesn't matter all that much against an unknown. I think that in exactly this sort of weird spot that we're in, my play stands to do pretty well, even though I'm not doing it with anything like a balanced range. And I probably never actually have the nuts when I take this line, but there's no way for him to know that, given our complete lack of any history. So he tanks for a while and ends up folding, and he asks me in the chat if I had king, 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 king. Says, nice bet, well played. And I think he keeps talking in just a minute. Yeah, he tells me he folded a boat. He may or may not be lying, but I'm going to go ahead and lie back. I typed Quadzilla. And I'm going to pause again real quick here. Got a few hands going on. This guy Will Fry is opened again, and I have ace-queen in the cutoff against him. This is a pretty marginal spot between call and re-raise, but given what happened in the last hand where I raised and he folded and thought he may have folded the best hand, I think I'm more likely to get some action on my re-raise with mediocre hands, so I'm going to go ahead and re-raise it. And then on this other table, I checked ace-5 in the big blind and flopped middle pair. I think that's a good board to lead out. It's not quite a value bet, it's not quite a bluff, it's a little bit of both. And I'm not really sure what I'm doing on later streets if called. I mean, certainly I'm hoping to improve, but I may or may not check call the turn if I'm called. Probably not. I probably just check fold the turn if I don't improve. Maybe I fire a second barrel as a bluff some of the time if I think that the guy might have called with, 6s through jacks or something. But in any case, I think betting is clearly right there. And I'm also going to bet this 7-5 straight draw in the upper left corner. And I get called by the small blind with the 7-5 there. When he calls, I'm thinking his range is probably something like any sort of 9, 8s, 7s, straight draw, flush draw. And I'm just going to check behind on the turn because the stack sizes relative to pot size are kind of ugly for a bet here. I'd be probably forced to fold, but not very happy about it if I bet and get raised all in. No, I'm definitely forced to fold. I'm definitely not happy about it if I get raised all in there. And now he bets out river for close to full pot, and I'm going to end up bluff shoving for just a little more than a min raise here. I need it to work just about half the time for it to show a profit. And my reasoning on this bluff shove is that with the range I think he check called the flop with there, the turn and river are not good cards for him unless he had Jack 9 or King 9 or the King or Jack of hearts. It's very unlikely that those cards improved his hand, and I think that furthermore it made it unlikely that he'd be value betting a bear 9 here, something like ace 9 or queen 9 or 9-10. So really the only hands that are going to call my bluff, I think, are if he slow played a set on the flop, or if he turned a rivered 2-pair. I think those are the hands that are likely to call the shove. Those hands are, I'm pretty sure, all going to definitely call the shove. But if he's value betting just a pair of jacks, I think he's going to fold that. If he's value betting just a pair of kings, it's close, but I think there's a chance he folds that. And he's certainly folding if he has 8-7, 7-5, or some flush draw that he's now bluffing with. So mainly I'm just bluffing to get him to fold other bluffs, but I think it's going to show a profit here. Turns out he has the set of sixes and calls me just about immediately. That's certainly going to happen some of the time there, but I'm still happy with how I played the hand. Now on the lower right table, I've got the ace-queen against queen square. Or is that what it says? Yeah, queen square is his name. And this is another spot where I'm making a read based on a relatively small number of hands, but he's 54-0 over 13 hands, and it's pretty unlikely that if you have anything close to reasonable pre-flop hand selection, you're calling over half your hands and never raising. So when he leads out on that flop really doesn't hit much. Maybe he's top pair, but more likely he's something like a gut shot or something like that, or just total air. So I call. The second 8 on the turn is a perfect card to keep calling on, because it makes it that much less likely that he had top pair and doesn't improve any of the hands that I was beating before. So I call turn, and I was probably going to call river on any card other than a 5, 6, or 7, which are all the hands that all the cards that improve the hands that were gut shots on the flop. So I'm pretty happy with that call down. I think it was pretty clearly correct against him because he's so loose pre-flop that he's just not going to have it enough of the time there. And now this ace-queen against Newag up here, this is going to be the last hand of the video. He re-raises, and I think it's a pretty clear call. I'd probably fold. I could maybe fold ace-jack there. I'd definitely fold ace-10. And now the flop comes down real bad for me. And it's certainly between folding and shoving. I don't like calling there at all. That holds regardless of my hand, not just with ace-queen. With my whole range, I'm shove or fold on that board. And it's a good enough flop for my range, enough hands of mine flopped sets or over pairs or straight draws that I'll be shoving all of those, and I can pretty comfortably just let the ace-queen go, because it's just about the worst hand given the board texture that I'll ever have here. Okay, so that about wraps up the video. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please post any feedback, any questions about hands that you have, and I'd also be interested to hear from you guys how you like this format where I do the voiceover on play I've already seen before as opposed to talking about the hands as I play them. I can do whichever you prefer in future videos. And yeah, I'd really like to know which you like better. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and good luck in all your games.